1. Stephen King's It. The premise is you're a newly awakened Pennywise after 27 years of slumber. The game would take place several years in the past before encountering the Losers Club. In my opinion, I would make the game take place in the 1950s. My reasoning is we've never seen Pennywise in this era. In addition, the 1950s would be 27 years before the first book by Stephen King, which came out in 1986. The characters would be the parents of the kids from the movies. Now that they themselves are kids, they would have to try and convince their own parents of the evil of Pennywise, just like the Losers Club had to. This would also explain why the parents of the Losers Club were all a little off in the movies. Because they were traumatized by the antics of Pennywise in this game. This would add to the lore of the series as a whole. The gameplay would take place in 1950s Derry, Maine. The 1950s is also an interesting time period, because the Cold War is happening during this time. In a time where war is looming over the American population, their fear would be enhanced. And of course, Pennywise, being the troll that he is, would take full advantage of this. The gameplay loop is you instill fear into your victims, and as you succeed in feeding on their fear and eating them, the role-playing game aspect kicks in, which lets you level up, unlocking new powers and abilities. The challenge of the game would be to make sure the parents remain in a stupor, unaware of your actions. And to make sure the kids stay in a constant state of fear, because as we know, when they're no longer afraid, they are able to seriously harm or kill Pennywise. 2. Cabin in the Woods is a horror interactive drama. In the same vein as supermassive type games, Cabin in the Woods was a movie that had a unique take on horror movies, in which young adults went on a vacation, but little did they know it was controlled by reluctant scientists that needed sacrifices to feed the Ancient Ones, a group of deities in which all horror movie creatures stemmed from. Failure to satisfy these beings would result in the end of the world. The decisions the friends made influenced the outcome, and determined what monsters would come after them. Like picking up a cursed object corresponding to a monster, supermassive games specialize in making decision-based games in which quick time events and player decisions influence the story, as well as having great stories in general. In addition, they make games in which you can have multiple endings, good and bad, based on the decisions you made. For a horror movie like Cabin in the Woods, in which every decision they made affected them, this would make for great replayability. 3. Babadook. I think as a Five Nights at Freddy type of game. The Babadook is about a boogeyman-like creature that haunts this family after the loss of a loved one. But the Babadook is basically a metaphor for the embodiment and personification of grief. As the movie said, just like grief, you can't get rid of the Babadook, which means you must survive it. I believe this meshes well with the Five Nights at Freddy's series, because the game is all about being a security guard or kid trying to survive situations with homicidal animatronics. The gameplay loop would be 6 nights, with each night representing a stage of acceptance. Those being denial, anger, bargaining, depression, guilt, and anxiety. Each night bringing their own scares and attempts by the Babadook to stop the family. I think the transition from movie to video game would be cool, as the movie already has great concepts like the art style of the Babadook, and the picture book that shows up on the family's bookshelf one day. Supernatural is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. We follow Sam and Dean Winchester, two brothers who hunt supernatural creatures for a living, with the tagline of always having something to hunt. In the game, however, we wouldn't follow Sam and Dean though. I'm thinking of a game in the same spirit as Alan Wake and the Resident Evil remakes, in which you get a call from Bobby, Sam, or Dean asking you to follow up on mysterious incidents in a town or city. We would follow a young, inexperienced hunter in some other country, which is why the main characters from the OG series can't handle it. This decision is because A. We've pretty much went everywhere in the US in the show, and B. Different countries have different supernatural creatures. Examples would be Japanese mythology have yokai, and Arabic mythology have jinn. The gameplay would be uncovering the mystery of the strange disappearances of the town, which would of course undoubtedly lead to some world-ending scenario, and maybe some type of crafting system. In the show you needed specific methods to defeat a particular creature, such as specific items, spells, or legendary equipment. In the show these items are used to defeat specific creatures, because sometimes different creatures required different methods to defeat them, such as needing to salt and burn the bones of the deceased to get rid of vengeful ghost. Demons can only be defeated by a special biblical blade, or by angels, etc. The gameplay would consist of detective work to find out what you're dealing with and gather intel. Crafting to make the items needed to defeat whatever you're facing. And third or first person shooting. 5. A Quiet Place. I'm sure everyone knows about this movie series. Especially because at the time of making this video the second movie has just been released. But just in case you've never seen it. The movies are about this alien race known as the Death Angels who arrived on Earth via asteroids. These aliens are incredibly strong, being able to bend and break steel, incredibly durable, having exoskeletons that are bulletproof, as well as being extremely fast, with incredible hearing. Their only weaknesses are their lack of sight and their hearing, which, while being the reason they are so good at hunting, is also sensitive. The gameplay would be a stealth game in which you gather resources and try to build up a camp with other survivors. Because the angels are so dense they cannot swim. So, the main camp could take place on an island, and you would have to go into town and cities to gather supplies while avoiding the angels. I'm thinking kind of like an Escape from Tarkov game loop, where you drop in and avoid other enemy players and angel NPC, gather supplies and head to extraction. This game could take place in a different country, which would add to the lore of the series if made canon.